That's the big question, is like the extent of Russian and Chinese support. If they go all out in supporting Iran, then yeah, Israel is really in bad shape. I mean, it's going to look very, very bleak for Israel. And I think it's a possibility. In a way, why not? You see what the Western world has done, on behalf of Ukraine. It's not like they've kind of have tried to restrain themselves as far as supporting Ukraine. We've seen what's happened, right? It's not just that they're directly supplying with weapons. All their involvement is huge. Now the Russians and the Chinese don't have to go that far, but they could go a long ways towards supporting Iran. And why not? Really, why not? They should, because if if Iran falls, it's going to be a real blow to both of them, and I think they understand that. Again, right now the stated goal is not regime change, but it could easily. But there's questions about that. We have reasons to be doubtful that it isn't. Um, certainly Russia and China would not like to see that happen. And again, Russia, though they don't have a mutual defense pact with Iran, which apparently they offered Iran, but Iran refused, incredibly. They do have this strategic partnership, and they don't want to see their strategic partner go down. So they can do a lot. They can provide offensive and defensive weapons to Iran. Both China and Russia can, and they can supply them through Pakistan, because Pakistan has shown a willingness to help out, and Pakistan is actually allied with China.
Well, that's scary because if the U.S. is getting involved and all of a sudden there are maybe Chinese fighters or defense systems in Iran that shoot down a U.S. plane or are used to attack a U.S. base, then is that how World War III starts? Like, how
Yeah,
big of a risk are
yeah.
we
I think
looking at?
they're gonna be careful to try to keep it below the level. At least as the U.S. in Ukraine, up until the actual lifting of the restrictions on the ATACMS, they were trying to not cross that red line, right? And I think probably both the Russians and Chinese would do the same. They would be involved on many different levels, providing them with intelligence, advisors, and above all, equipment. But but would be careful to avoid any direct conflict with Israel and the United States. So they could still do a lot, without going that far. Now, I'm
Right.
just wondering, there's also a question. I think I just heard, maybe it was a couple hours ago, that Iran actually has ended, or put a pause on its relationship with the IAEA. He said, we're not doing this anymore for obvious reasons, because it appears that the IAEA was actually complicit in this attack, which is a terrible, um, which, if true, and it certainly appears to be true, is really a terrible blow to the NPT regime. Um, Now, I think both China and Russia do not want to see Iran actually get a nuclear weapon. It's just in the interest of maintaining the NPT. Even though it has been damaged greatly by the AEA, they want to rebuild it. They want to, they don't want to see proliferation throughout the Middle East. So, but Iran has a real reason, for going after the nuclear weapon at this point. It's just obvious to anybody who looks at the situation. Hey, we tried to play by the rules. We did. We did play by the rules. It's not that we tried. We played by the rules. We were completely in compliance, and look what happened. We need to have a nuclear weapon. It's the only way to defend ourselves. I can just speculate, but I think it's quite probable that Iran is making that case to China and Russia, and this actually gives Iran some leverage, and say, we really need help. And, if you can't help us, we're just going to have to go for a nuclear weapon. And maybe, if China or Russia was hesitant about supporting Iran. I think hearing that, they say, "Don't worry, we'll go. You don't have to go down that road because we've got your back. We're gonna be helping you now in a very meaningful way."
Yeah, yeah. When I feel like the damage that has been done to the rules-based order, we talked about the IAEA being complicit in this, and we've just seen how all these institutions of the West have been used as tools of Western hegemony. Do you think that what we've done here was just so egregious to the concept of a rules-based international order that it's
Yeah,
irreparable? It's done,
yeah,
right?
it's done severe damage. It's not. I think like the whole notion of a rules. I haven't even heard it used recently, but the rules-based, international order. The whole concept is a joke now. I mean, everybody can see what's going on. It was already a joke before this attack by Israel, but now it's even more obviously so. I think if it was still standing, before the attack by Israel, it's no longer standing. I mean, it uh, doesn't have legs to stand on. It's gone. Um, but let's see, what was I going to say?
I mean, if it's gone, then Western hegemony is essentially over, right? So we're just sort of playing out the end game here and hoping that it doesn't go to World
Yeah.
War III.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
it's
Well,
like,
this is, of course, we've talked about the three pillars of Western hegemony, and one of them is soft power. Western hegemonic soft power has been suffered yet another blow, another very serious blow. I mean, one thing is just the absurdity of here. This is a country that has been complying with the NPT, has been subject to very extensive and intrusive IAEA inspections over the years, probably more than any other country in the world. That signed the JCPOA, and everybody admits, the Iranians kept their part of it, and even when the other side didn't, both the U.S. and the Europeans failed to remove the sanctions. That was their part of the deal. They just didn't do it. The Iranians kept it, and then even after Trump tore up the deal, the Iranians continued to keep it another year, yeah, and just with the hope that somehow the U.S. would come back into it. So they've gone beyond, being compliant and being, truly abiding by the rules, of the so-called rules-based international order. And then here on the other side, of course, as we pointed out many times, there's Israel that has, this secret arsenal of nuclear weapons, isn't compliant, launched this completely unprovoked attack, and is attacking the nuclear facilities, war crimes, and it's supposed to be what the IAEA is supposed to, they're all about, is preventing these kind of things from happening, but it looks like they're complicit. So, I mean, the hypocrisy, the double standard is just so extreme that, yeah, it's just become a joke. And I think most of the world sees it very clearly. It just sees, you have these European leaders making these just outrageous statements. It's like, okay, now Iran has a chance to join, become a good member of the international community. And after all this, it's still Iran. Iran is the one that is the wayward child, and not Israel.
right? The hypocrisy is just staggering. So,
Right.
but does that? I mean, if everybody sees it, if everybody sees that the system that controls the world is just so engaging in such hypocrisy, then what? Then what does that mean? What is that? The world is just going to reject it, and we're going to see that when people make fun of it, and then these systems start to crumble and collapse, and then a
Yeah.
new system goes into place. Broadly speaking,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Well, that's what we're seeing already. That's what we're seeing with the rise of BRICS and the realignment of a lot of countries that used to be solidly in the Western camp, and are now diversifying, let's say, their diplomatic relations, and they're looking to other partners. Again, like the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are an example. They used to be just completely, solid members of that that Western or U.S. led hegemonic order, and no longer. They certainly have a foot within it. There's no question about it. They continue to have a fairly close relationship with the U.S., but they are now, they've made peace with Iran. They've been and are developing ties with both Russia and China. It's just everybody's kind of sees the way the world is going. I think all around the world, and so you are, and this is just more another push that gives more impetus to that trend, and it's just going to accelerate.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the U.S. actually does go to war with Iran, it's like, will the world allow it to happen? Like, as it starts to grow, people will have to take sides, and who will take the side of the United States? We talk about nuances all the time, but here we don't have a lot of nuance. We have a pretty black and white. We have a country, Israel, that engaged in a very devious attack. We compare it to Pearl Harbor, but this was even more devious because we were actively engaged in negotiations, and then we assassinate like the equivalent of Pete Hegseth, all these assassinations and these, like, it's not like we were just going, it wasn't a military base with just personnel. We were killing people in apartment buildings. It was so devious. It's like doing the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones, type of, I know you don't watch Game of Thrones, but people will get that reference. But but it's just crazy. This is what we've done, and the world they won't allow. I mean, if they have to take sides, people are going to side with Iran. Iran has become more popular than ever now.
Well, there's not only did they assassinate all these people, the generals and the nuclear scientists, and often killed many, many civilians in the process. They did kill many, many civilians in the process of doing that, as we saw Israel do in Lebanon. They also killed at least one of the lead negotiators. One of the guys that's sitting across the table from, I guess they were in different rooms, but negotiating with Steve Witkoff.
It's so
and now they're demanding that they come back. It's just like, coming back and negotiate. Now we're asking Iran to come to the negotiating table. It's right. It's just that I don't know what it is. That there's just no self-reflection. What have you done? And, how can you expect anybody to ever trust you again? It's amazing that the Iranians trusted him as much as they did. I think they'd had their doubts, but there was this, this maybe a residue, just some bit of trust that hadn't been, totally destroyed by all the previous treachery. And so they still gave the negotiations a chance, and it appears that they're very foolish to have done so.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't think of a more clear good guy, bad guy type of scenario for the world to decide on. It's just
it is black and white. It's absolutely. And let's never forget, as this war rages, and it's got all our focus, the carnage, the horror in Gaza continues. It's just these massacres of aid seekers occur almost every day. Another 20 hungry people that are trying to get something to keep them alive get gunned down by the IDF. This is happening, virtually every day in Gaza, and nobody even notices it because they've gone on and they've attacked somebody else.
Right. Just in case you need a reminder of who the bad guys are, just look at what's happening in Gaza every day. These just people, starving people getting gunned down looking for food. It's just, it's crazy. So, I mean, if the U.S. does engage in a war, I'm just wondering, this is a war on the opposite side of the world for the United States, which also just goes to show how crazy that this whole thing is, that the United States somehow is thinking that this is existential for them, or that this is a huge threat to America, is just so absurd. This is so crazy. And then will the U.S., how will we engage in this war? I don't think we haven't launched these attacks, like you said, from our bases in the Middle East. We're not using them because we know that it's just, there's just sitting ducks, and no countries that are hosting these bases want us to use these bases, because all of a sudden those countries will be complicit and under attack. So it's like, how do we even engage this war? Nobody wants to be on our side. No one wants to allow us to use their territories to launch attacks on Iran. So what do we expect, that we're going to be way out at sea? I mean, sure, this was an impressive feat, but I mean, How much did it cost to fly these B-2 bombers there and drop these bombs? How many of these bombs do we have? Is this what we're going to have to do? These very expensive, very far sorties that require air refueling constantly? Like,
Yeah.
it's not, I don't understand how we think that we would even be able to engage in a war with Iran fully. It just doesn't, the logistics just to pull off this one bombing thing feat, I'm sure was extensive. We can't maintain that level of operations daily. And then, of course, Iran has a say in the matter. They might start striking back. What it all comes down to, at the end of the day, it all comes down to Israel. They are in charge of the rate of escalation completely, and it all comes down to much pain can Israel take, and we don't think they can take much. The more that pain that they're taking, the more that they'll start to panic, and the more they start to panic, the more pressure they're going to put on the United States to get involved, and the United States is probably going to have no choice. Well, we do have a choice, but our government, we know how they work, that they will step in line, Israel first. So that's what it comes down to. And unfortunately, Israel can't take a lot of pain. So we're going to see us go up the escalation ladder quickly.
Yeah, I think there's a very good chance of it. Interestingly, there have been reports coming from Israel. Some of them contradicted by other reports, but it seems that that the majority of these reports indicate that Israel wants to bring this to a speedy conclusion. Like I think I heard that according to Israel media, that the IDF is going to wind this down over the next few days. Maybe like within a week, and then say, okay, we've achieved our objectives. We bombed what we wanted to bomb, and then that's that. So if so, and that's an indication that Israel really does want to pull out of this, that things maybe are not going according to plan. But of course, Iran has a say in this. Yeah, you started this fight. You don't get just declare after doing, assassinating all these people and causing all this destruction, that you can't just walk away from this. We're going to keep on fighting. And like, it's not, again, there are a lot of questions. It's just like, we don't know. There have been, many have argued, have suggested that Iran is suffering a shortage of launchers, and that has prevented them from, firing as many missiles as they would like to, and that's why we're seeing these smaller strikes. Instead of 150, you're seeing maybe 20 missiles sent, and still, several of these missiles get through and do some serious damage. So other people say no, that's part of the plan. Iran is just in this for the long haul, so they just decided to, kind of slow down the tempo, and they're just going to keep on going. We'll see. Again, there's just this fog of war. We hear all this. There's all this information and misinformation and speculation. That's the big question. Is really, well, I guess there's two big questions, like especially on the Iranian side. Do they have a sufficient number of launchers? How many missiles do they have? We don't know. We've been told that they had these very sophisticated missiles, and I think indeed we see that they do have those missiles. I think that question has been answered. But how many? You heard thousands, tens of thousands, maybe 150,000 when you include or more when you include the short range and the medium range missiles. But we don't know. We really don't know. So there's a question over the quantity they have. There's a question mark over the number of launchers they have. That could be a real bottleneck. And then there's also the air defense. It seems like the air defense really, isn't as strong as we thought it was. It may have been that it really suffered some serious damage during that initial surprise attack. All the drones that were launched from actually within Iranian territory did a lot of damage to the air defense system. Or maybe it was never quite as strong as we thought it was. It should have been stronger. One thing we've learned actually from Putin directly was that he offered to help them build up their air defense system, and they apparently said no, which which is really surprising to me. I think all of us assumed that the Russians were helping them to build up the air defense system, and maybe they didn't, and that seems to have been a serious mistake on their part. Why is that? I've heard different stories. I think one possibility is just Iranian pride. They've strongly valued their independence. They want to do it, do it on their own. But I think you got to accept help, when you're dealing with enemies like Israel and the United States. So anyway, that's on the Iranian side. We just really don't know exactly like the state of their air defense. In general, it seems like Israeli planes have kept out of Iranian airspace. I saw some reports, unconfirmed, that there were planes flying over Tehran, just like in the last 12 hours or so. I'm not sure if that's true or not. If it is, that would be a disturbing development. Um, but on the Israeli side, it's just, again, Israel is so much smaller, again, than and fragile in some ways than Iran is. That Iran, even if it is suffering grievous blows, as long as it can send out some missiles, like even every other day, Israel is going to be in a real fix. Their main port in Haifa, as you know, is partially shut down. Maersk, one of the largest international shipping lines, it says we're not going there anymore. The Ben Gurion airport has been shut down. I heard it's going to be partially reopened, but I don't think there's a chance that you're not going to get any of the um, airliners from outside of Israel going there. Uh, so it's just like, as long as like every few days Iran lobs a missile towards Haifa or towards Ben Gurion, it's just that Israel is in a fix. I'm sure they've already suffered very grievous economic damage. And this constant, they have suffered a minimal number of casualties, in spite of all the damage that's been done, because they do have a very good um, sheltering system, air raid shelters. And they do get their people down there. Now, I've heard it's a lot better for Jewish Israelis than it is for Arab Israelis. That's one thing. I think there were a number of actually Arab Israelis that were killed because they didn't have a shelter to go to. They, it hadn't been built for their town. Um, so anyway, but constantly having going down those shelters, that again, just over time, it's going to wear a country down. It affects their economy. And this is a economy that is highly dependent on trade um, and tourism and so on and so forth. And that this is going to so again, Iran, even if it is sort of on the ropes, as long as it can land the occasional punch, it's Israel is going to be in real trouble.
Okay, so you think that as it's in real trouble, Israel is going to try to push for a ceasefire. Of course, though, whenever there's a ceasefire that Israel agrees to, it's like, okay, you guys stop shooting, but we can kind of do what we want. We saw that in Lebanon, we saw that in
Right.
Gaza. Do you think that there's actually a chance that Iran would agree to some type of ceasefire? Only if maybe they really don't have the missiles for perhaps to
Right.
engage in something like
Yeah,
this.
there's a chance, and that's right. I just I raised these questions about Iran's Iran's military capabilities, and if the answer is that Iran is in serious trouble, it lacks the launchers or whatever, the air defense system really needs to be rebuilt. They might go for it, and it might make sense. It's just say, okay, yeah, we were caught off guard. We suffered this. We made the mistake of not working with the Russians to build up our air defense system. Okay, let's let them have their ceasefire, and we'll correct these mistakes, and we'll just be in a much stronger position when they attack again, because we can expect that they will. So that's a possibility. But yeah, if they feel that they actually have the Israelis on the ropes, that they in fact are not in danger of running out of missiles or launchers, that they have, maybe it's a weakened air defense system, but it's sufficient to keep, most aircraft out of their airspace. Uh, the incentive will be to continue. We'll see.